Hey guys, Kyle, the Death Knight of Anime here, bringing you my review for Fire Force Season 2, Episode 17. And boy, do we got a lot to talk about here today. So right out of the gate, let's talk about what we learned about Nataku in this episode, because while I understand that there are different standards when it comes to when it comes to how the Japanese approach parenting compared to here in the West, Nataku's past is a prime example of why certain people should just not be parents. And in this case, it's doubly true because if you really take a moment really take a moment to sit back and examine pretty much everything that was going on in Nataku's childhood and and Nataku's childhood and how that affected him in the present, for the like every single expectation that basically Nataku's parents had thrust on him had for the longest time changed and warped his perception to the point where by the time he met Rekka and became an experiment in the and became basically a Hajime experiment, the mere thought of failure was an unacceptable weakness in his mind because no one ever bothered to teach him the very simple lesson that failure can also breed even greater success. Like if you learn from it, and that it's honestly okay to be weak at times because it allows you to in order to grow as a person, and it allows you to in order to rely on others and lean on others when you need them or they need you. And in a very ironic twist, I kind of love how pretty much Kurano, the person who's been beating on Nataku up to this point, was the one to teach him these lessons in the end. And oddly, the only one aside from Shinra who really understands him. Like it's kind of weird to say, but when it pretty much comes to Kurano, the man constantly talks about weakness, and it's one of those things where it's obviously a very weird kind of tick, or it's a very weird tick or quirk to have in order to love weak people so much. But in this case, it really works because it basically it shows just how much but by being around weak people, he understands weakness in a weird way, even though he himself is so strong. Um, with that said, one thing that I think is a very key point to take away to take away from this episode is that this is the first time that Company 8 has actually successfully protected one of the pillars against the White-Clad, because every other confrontation they've had with them up to this point has ended with the White-Clad gaining the alliance of someone who's considered a pillar. And even though technically the White-Clad had pretty much let Nataku go, it shows that this is kind of a situation where our heroes have to take any small victories they can get in a situation where when it comes to how the dynamics of battle work, when the dynamics of the conflicts in this world work, you have to look at it from the battle and war perspective. Like it's less about winning the battle and more about winning the war and preventing whatever the White-Clad are planning from happening at all by pretty much protecting these people who are considered pillars. That's kind of the key thing here is in order to truly win this war against the White-Clad and prevent whatever it is they're planning, and prevent them from awakening another cataclysm. Protecting the pillars is kind of the key thing here. Now, obviously, with the whole idea that that the White-Clad just kind of just for letting Nataku go, it does show that they do need to kind of that they still do need to be vigilant and make sure that they protect Nataku at any possible turn, and make sure the White-Clad don't get their hands on him. But yeah. However, this arc once again, I feel with this arc, it definitely dove into the gray morality of everyone involved in this arc, because as Kurano in the end turned out to be a pretty in order to be a much better person than we originally thought, but Haijima as a whole is still the most suspect in all this through their actions of trying to push for someone who can use the Adola Burst, and for someone who they can use in order to power a second Amaterasu. And even though it's one of those things where even though Haijima and the Eighth did form a very strenuous alliance, it's one where you can tell they still benefit no matter what they still benefit, and it doesn't matter what happens from here, because as established, they're the ones who hold all the cards, which opens up an even bigger can of worms that yes, they knew the truth about the Amaterasu but did nothing because it if that was lost, then the Tokyo Empire would crumble, which in itself is definitely playing on the idea of what happens when society relies on one singular form of energy. Yet I also can't deny the way the Haijima president threw Shinra's own ideals and beliefs about being a hero back at him with the whole logic of sacrificing one person to save many. It is very interesting how Shinra's kind of logic was thrown back at him in that sense, and with the with the logic behind the Amaterasu is one of those things, and it's one of those things where he's like don't get me wrong, for as much as Haijima and Haijima's president are scumbags, it's he's not technically wrong either because both the eighth Haijima and just everyone in general have failed to find an alternative. Like the world, the Tokyo Empire doesn't have an alternative form of energy, so really Amaterasu is all they can rely on, unfortunately. And of course, thankfully, in order to counter that, we also see Vulcan come in to shut down the idea of a second Amaterasu by saying he'll make a completely new generator, one not powered by the Adola Burst, which is one of those things where it's generally a great moment for Vulcan, and this is going to put him, and I love how this is going to put him in like this much more in the spotlight going forward, but I also like how this plays off every single bit of previous development that Vulcan has gotten, like and what we've seen from him thus far. Like everything that Vulcan has experienced up to this point has contributed to basically this moment of him walking in saying, I'm gonna say, he's saying, well, pretty much fuck the Amaterasu. I'm going to build my own generator, and it's going to be one that's even better than the one my family made, which in itself, again, pretty much playing off everything that he's experienced, and what's led him to this moment. Vulcan right now, he's accepted the part his family played in the Amaterasu's creation, and he wants to correct that part of their history by making his own legacy, one that's not tainted by human sacrifice. Vulcan right now, he's one of those people who refuses to let history keep repeating itself, even if it means helping pretty much Haijima, which, yeah, going off what I said before, even in the moments where it felt like our heroes had the higher ground against Haijima, in this episode, like, Haijima themselves still had control. So whatever happens from here, the Eighth do have to be very wary of anything going forward with Haijima, because I'm sure the Haijima president's whole thing of working with the Eighth and allowing a new more efficient generator to be built is genuine. But at the same time, the Haijima, again, overall, the Haijima Industries have proven not to be very trustworthy. So they just need to be very careful going forward of how this whole thing is the Eighth need to be very careful of how much they're willing to trust Haijima right now. Of course, even before leaving, we see that Inca, even before leaving, we basically see that. And going back to how and going back to the whole thing of how this of a lot of what happened in this episode. Basically, this episode is the basically this episode is the culmination of this episode is pretty much the pretty much conclusion of the of the of the Haijima Industries arc, as you could plainly see, and but pretty much even before the White-Clad had dipped and ducked out, we basically see that Inca has a premonition about premonition Nataku's future. That very heavily implies that the next cataclysm is still going to happen, no matter how much our heroes try to stop it. But in terms of Nataku's role in all of it, yeah, we can safely assume that what happened here in this episode is more than likely going to happen again, except Nataku might not make it out of it alive next time, which shows that Shinra really needs to be prepared next time if he even wants a prayer in making sure that the worst case scenario doesn't happen to both Nataku and the world. I also like how this episode really explored Charon more, and how underneath that twisted obligation to follow the White-Clad's teachings, he not only genuinely cares for people who are considered pillars, but this whole experience also showed us he does have his own moral limit, and how far he's willing to tolerate the extreme actions from the other members of the White-Clad before he feels things have gone too far and needs to step in to put a stop to it himself. And it's through that as well that we see that this whole system of guardian and pillar to him isn't just restrained to the White-Clad, as he accepted that Kurano is the one who should be the guardian of Nataku. So in that sense, it really fleshed out Charon as a much more moral character than we initially perceived him as. Now, art and animation is an interesting thing. Now, finally, art and animation. And art and animation is an interesting thing to talk about with this episode, because largely I'd say it was once again an insane episode with the amount of detail that was put into it. However, where I feel the episode did fall short in this regard is in the smaller and more intimate moments, like that heart-to-heart between that heart-to-heart moment that Prince Nataku and Kurano had. In the manga, it was a thing where Nataku's tears had much more emphasis on them, but here it felt like a very standard sad scene, and some moments with Kurano didn't come off as impactful as maybe they should have in this episode as well. But yeah, so it's one of those things where overall art and animation was great, but it is in the smaller moments where it did kind of not succeed as well as it could have. And on the flip side to that, though, adaptation-wise, this episode was once again a pretty great one. Was pretty great. One thing I will say though, and I think this kind of more has to do just with the story itself, is that because this episode does mark the conclusion of the Haijima Industries arc, it did feel a little clunky and slow in paces just through the smallest of things and whatnot. But changes just for the smallest changes they made of switching certain moments around. But aside from, and it didn't feel as pretty much linear as in the manga. But aside from that, it was again another great adaptation. Also, with this episode ending where it did in correlation to the manga, I'm certain I know now. I'm practically 100% sure now. I know where the season is going to end, especially with the next arc being so short. So, but yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and also Crunchyroll. Death Knight of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.